You're listening to TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour, with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
It's been a little while since we have done a video show, but we're doing one today. So those of you who are online, streaming the TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour, you're able to watch the broadcast this week, so I hope that you enjoy that. Doing a Skype interview with Rick Tyler, and Rick Tyler was a two-term congressional candidate there in Tennessee. He also ran for the governorship of Tennessee in this last election. He's also recently been appointed as the new president and chief executive officer of the American Freedom Party, which of course is a nationwide political party here in the United States, not quite as big as the Democrat or Republican parties, but they're starting to put themselves on the map. And so we're going to have a conversation with Rick for the next hour, and hope you'll stay tuned. So you had run for Congress.
Yes, I was actually on the ballot in 2018 in Tennessee for the U.S. House of Representatives as well as governor of Tennessee.
So you were running for both offices at the same time? Yes,
I was. A lot of people don't know you can do that.
You had your website, Rick Tyler for Congress. Did you have a website for governor as well?
I did, but the primary content is on my Rick Tyler for Congress website, and the gubernatorial website, was just very generic. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to raise a lot of money, which obviously money is the lifeblood of successful political campaigns. But I tell people that the first step is getting on the ballot and getting your name out there. And very often, even in establishment political circles, we know that there is a crescendo effect with candidacies. Often someone has to run multiple times to get the name recognition and ultimately get the traction. More or less. I did get quite a bit of exposure in 2016 when I ran for Congress, and I had a very, very controversial billboard.
And I remember seeing you on the news because of the billboard.
Yes, to me it should not have been controversial at all, but of course in this climate that we're living in today, which is even worse than 2016, I might add, right. Given the level and degree of Trump derangement syndrome, or truth derangement syndrome, we might better term it. Now, of course, people just react in the most shrill and vitriolic manner to truth, which in my estimation should just be basically, routine.
And so do you plan to run again in 2020?
Yes, I do.
For governor and for Congress, or just for Congress? Or?
Well, the governorship will not be up for grabs in 2020. The incumbent governor, two-term governor, he was term limited out. And so the reason there were so many candidates on the ballot this last time was because it was an open seat. In 2020, there will be a U.S. Senate seat that will be open. Lamar Alexander, I believe, will be retiring. And, of course, Congress is up for re-election every 2 years. Chuck Fleischman is the incumbent in my district. And he has been in the office for a considerable amount of time now, I believe 8 terms. And so he's got, a very strong position. It's a strong Republican district. I run as an independent because it's very easy to get on the ballot in Tennessee as an independent. Believe it or not, all it requires is 25 signatures.
Wow.
And that's it. No money. And I was on the ballot in Florida for U.S. Senate back in 2010, and it actually cost me about $7,000 out of my own pocket just to get on the ballot then. So again, it is important that we get on the ballot first and foremost, because we never know when the winds might change or something might happen. If I had been able, for instance, to parlay my 2016 notoriety into what it had the potential to become, I could have, been easily in double digits and possibly even a viable contender in a 3-way race with a Republican that, if he were properly exposed, he could prove to be quite weak. And of course, the Democrats will only get, 30 to 35% in the district that I live in any given election. That's just the the statistics, the numbers, basically. That's all that's going to vote for them.
In the 2020 race, you're saying that there's a possibility that the Republican might not run. If that's the case, would you still run as an independent, or would you attempt to go the primary route and try to take the Republican seat?
No, he will most definitely run. What I'm saying is that he is vulnerable. He has characteristics that could make him a very weak candidate if they were properly exposed. If somebody running to the right of him, which I certainly am, were able to get the traction and get the forum to be able to expose who and what he really is, then he would immediately, instantaneously lose a lot of his luster and his credibility. So that would have to be the strategy, but it would have to be to do a Jesse Ventura type, candidacy, where Ventura won with 37% of the vote, the governorship of the state of Minnesota, in a tight three-way race. And that's what it would take in my circumstances. And again, it's not a pipe dream. It's not pie in the sky. It's very plausible. It's very viable. It would just simply require the ability to raise funds. And of course, that is easier said than done, because people are afraid to donate to a controversial candidate. They are afraid of being maligned, of being castigated in social media, possibly losing their job. I mean, there are people who have been exposed as having donated, for instance, $500 to a David Duke candidacy, and they wind up losing a business that they've operated for 30 years.
So you're saying people are afraid to donate because they're afraid that specifically they'll be targeted by the Internal Revenue Service?
Not just the IRS. The individual who lost the business that I'm speaking of out in California, it had nothing to do with Big Brother, nothing to do with the IRS. It was because of the fact that he was ostracized and he was attacked so vehemently in social media that his patronage withered away and his staff walked out on him. With the politically correct climate and environment that we live in today, people are incapable of having a backbone or thinking for themselves. I suffered the same phenomenon in my business. I own a restaurant and was boycotted instantaneously because of my billboard, and lost overnight 85% of my business.
Your restaurant, what type of restaurant did you own?
Well, it was classic American food. And by the way, I just recently, within the last 2 weeks, closed the restaurant of my own choosing and volition. I had planned to do that anyways, but I decided not to, because I didn't want to let the adversary drive me out of business. We are going to be opening a new family restaurant within a couple of months under different ownership. I am formally bowing out of ownership because of my intention to spend essentially full time in the activism realm and in pursuit of political office. But it was classic American food. We were in the venue of whitewater rafting in southeast Tennessee, and we were an extraordinarily popular restaurant with the rafting community and quite popular with the local population as well. But of course, even with the locals, we were always kind of the outsiders who weren't from the local area. So, we had to overcome that problem in a very, very small local area with 16,000 year-round population. It's very closed shop, if you will. We had done a good job in 6 or 7 years overcoming that. We were extremely popular with the seasonal tourist population and had a great business going. But overnight, because of the backlash and because of the vicious assault that came against us, overnight we experienced an 85% reduction in our retail business statistics. And so that, of course, is exactly what the enemy wants. They want people to be so fearful of standing for the truth because, in effect, they will have a very difficult time making a living. Of course, we are trying to work on a long-range program that will suffice to reverse the tide and to make this to where it won't be a problem for our people. If we can't overcome this, obviously we do have a great borderline terminal problem because everybody has to survive economically, and very few people are willing to lay everything on the line. Everybody should be, but everybody isn't.
I guess what I'm kind of getting at, and I'll just go ahead and ask the question directly. The majority of your customer base, was it white? Was it pretty well distributed across racial lines? I mean, who was it that you were getting the backlash from? It was white?
Overwhelmingly white.
Okay, so, and that's the, see, I guess that's the problem that I have. You know, sometimes we're tempted to complain, you know, about the black folks marching in the streets or whatever. Not only is that not happening, and if you want proof of that, just look at any protest against the Confederate flag. Or just look at any protest, for example, Silent Sam. You look at the pictures of the people who were toppling that statue. I didn't see any black people in those photos, Rick. You know, we're worried about the black folks and the Hispanic folks and whatever attacking our culture. It's the liberals and our own children who are doing it, Rick.
You're 100% correct, and in my case, it was very, very much what you're describing, because the rafting subculture, we're talking whitewater rafting,
right.
Big business, 500,000 people go down the river that we are immediately situated by. It is an overwhelmingly white pastime. Very few non-whites go rafting. Some do, but percentage-wise, you know, easily 95% of the clientele and the people that work in the industry, 99% of them are white. They are also young, and they are, you know, just a prima facie example of the extent to which the brainwashing, it's not even so much the dumbing down, it's more just the mind scrubbing, the brainwashing. These young liberal whites, many of them are you know, from semi-affluent backgrounds. They have the economic ability to frolic their time away during the summer on the river. And they are so liberal. They are so brainwashed. I mean, some of them were so passionate in their hostility toward and their opposition toward me. Another thing, on the day before the election in 2016, and by the way, my billboard only stayed up for 10 hours, and the wife of the owner of the property that the billboard was rented on hired somebody to come out at 1 in the morning and take it down. But in 10 hours, it went viral. And I got
interrupt you, but wouldn't that be a breach of contract, an actionable breach of contract against whoever she rented the property to for the billboard? Because once she rents the property, she kind of loses control over it.
Well, I do have a slam dunk. By the way, my statute of limitations for a civil suit is 4 years. I have a slam dunk on breach of contract. What is not a slam dunk is damages. And I contend that the damages that I sustained from this billboard, this contract being breached and the billboard being taken down would clearly be in the millions of dollars. Being able to lay that out definitively is the challenge. I still have...
Well, how do you monetize the loss of an election, which I guess is a possible consequence as well? So
sure, and these, of course, are the problem. They're intangibles. But what I was going to say is the day before the election, I put my same billboard on wheels on a large flatbed trailer, and I parked it on the roadside in Cleveland, Tennessee, which is, you know, right in the heart of my district, in front of the local daily newspaper, which of course had slandered me, you know, in a very sinister way on numerous occasions during the campaign. And so I pulled up in front of the newspaper, much to their chagrin and dismay, and they were outraged, but they very quickly found out that they couldn't do anything about it. The police told them that I had every right in the world to be there, that it was First Amendment. But I was descended upon over the ensuing 5 or 6 hours by literally hundreds, primarily white young people from the local nearby supposedly Christian college called Lee University in Cleveland, Tennessee.
That's the Church of God college, correct?
Yes. And these young, white, liberal, so-called Christians, they were out there in massive force and opposition, protesting me and the dozen or so people that were with me holding up placards and signs and my gigantic billboard. And so for the next literally 5 or 6 hours, I was engaged in a nonstop, spirited debate with, at times, 5 and 6 of them at a time. All of this, you know, was captured on video by different people who were videoing it. Certain professors even notified their students that they would get extra credit if they went out and played journalist. And it turned into a huge free-for-all on the roadside. Many of them had makeshift signs against me, but people passing by got the impression that this was a massive throng of people supporting my message. And it turned out to be a very, very amazing, spontaneous, grassroots demonstration that, again, it was primarily marshaled against me, but it couldn't readily be discerned from the passersby. The next day, I had my billboard out in front of my voting precinct in Polk County, which is 96% white. That day, out in front of my own precinct where I vote, among the people who had any reaction at all to my presence on the side of the road with my Make America White Again billboard, 75% of them were thumbs up, yay, go for it, completely supportive. There were 25% of those who made any response at all that were thumbs down, negative, shouting profanity. But the overwhelming majority of people in my home county, when confronted with the sign itself, had a favorable reaction. The day the billboard was put up, I got a call from the owner of the property. Now, again, it was his wife that had the sign taken down. But the owner called me that evening. The billboard had only been up, let's say, less than a half hour. And he said to me, Tyler, you're going to have to get more food at that restaurant. I said, why is that, Ken? He said, people are stopping. A crowd is gathering around your billboard. He says, I've already had a dozen calls, he said, and 11 of them said they're voting for you. So in the local county, minus the acute pressure, from outside forces, the overwhelming propensity of the local population is supportive toward me and my message. It's just that everybody is a follower. We have very few leaders. And also people are scared of their shadow. And so that's why it's so important that I not only not allow the enemy to defeat me, but ultimately in time, in the great film, The Fountainhead with Gary Cooper. The very last scene, Gary Cooper is standing on top of the skyscraper, and he's standing towering over everything in victory. And that has to be the final chapter of our book in everything that we do. And I believe it will be. And, of course, I have the added benefit of being just a fire-breathing believer in the gospel of Jesus Christ and a true biblicist, a true believer in the Word of God. And I know that the Scripture says that no weapon that is formed against me will prosper.
You had mentioned the Lee College students. Of course, the Church of God is a Pentecostal, you would presume, very conservative, old-fashioned type denomination, but I'm going to guess that maybe it's not anymore, that maybe, I guess, perceptions are often based on things that have long ago passed. And so, just, I guess, to kind of give a little bit of history on that, that campus used to be Bob Jones University back in the day before World War II as well. And by the way, Bob Jones University is another place where you would think that a conservative Christian running for public office would be welcome, but he's not. If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. is running again in 2018. Why didn't you bring the billboard back? Why did you choose to go a different?
Well, the billboard is the gift that keeps on giving. It has given me name recognition. And in 2018, there were factors and circumstances extant in my own, situation that I am dealing with in terms of laying the groundwork, for down the road type endeavors, especially 2020. And it just seemed to me at the time to be more tactically appropriate to be on the ballot, to make my presence known, to make sure that everybody knew that not only had Rick Tyler not gone away and ridden off into the sunset, but now was actually on the ballot for governor too. But I was working, as I am right now, very diligently and dutifully towards laying the groundwork for the next most meaningful installment, of our crusade, if you will. And 2020 certainly is what I'm talking about. Not only will I be running for Congress in 2020, but also I am hoping to be the standard bearer for the political party, which I am the CEO of, called the American Freedom Party.
That was going to be my next question: is why was the CEO of the American Freedom Party running as an independent? So I'll go ahead and let you.
The laws in the states of this union are very overall they're very inhospitable to alternative parties. It's a duopoly. We have the Republicans and the Republicrats, and like George Wallace said, back in the late 60s and the early 70s, he said, when all is said and done, there's not a dime's worth of difference. And of course, we've seen that, save, for the obvious factors of Supreme Court appointments and some things that do make a difference. Don't get me wrong. If I have to choose the lesser of evils, I'm clearly going to choose the Republican Party. But sometimes what you see is what you get option can be better because the Republicans have been so inherently deceptive over the years. But the American Freedom Party, it is very difficult to get it on the ballot in the respective states. They have draconian laws that make it extremely difficult to get official ballot status and then maintain it. You have to either come up with a massive amount of signatures, and then you have to garner a certain percentage of the vote in order to maintain the status. This is why Ventura back in Minnesota, he actually ran on the Reform Party ticket. And that, of course, life was breathed into it by the Ross Perot candidacies of the early 90s, 92 and 96. So the American Freedom Party is an established national party. We have a national board. We are registered with the Federal Election Commission. And there are certain benefits that accrue to being a formally established party. Our objective is to have ballot status nationwide, but it is a very formidable undertaking. And if one runs as an independent and openly identifies with the American Freedom Party, this is part of the process whereby we introduce people to the fact that there is an alternative party, and one that, unlike the Libertarians or the Green Party or the Constitution Party, one that is willing to deal with the real meat and potatoes, hardcore truth issues that the fate of the republic hinges upon.
Well, I want to come back to the American Freedom Party in a minute. Before we do, I want to go backwards a little bit because there was one more thing that I wanted to ask you that we didn't get to. If you were to run for Congress in 2020 and win, or for that matter, had you won in 2018, the same question would be just as applicable. Given what just happened to Representative Steve King, what do you think is what would end up happening to you in Congress?
Well, it's interesting to observe the phenomenon of Steve King because he is someone who is willing to only go a certain distance, towards, the real truth. He will talk about Western, civilization, and he will use a lot of the phraseology and terminology that many people understand the import and the implications of. But when confronted with the charge of being a racist, Steve King does what all of his fellow travelers do. He will bob and weave, and he will backpedal, and he will, issue disclaimers, and he will, try to convince the world that he's not a quote-unquote racist. And, of course, that is the absolute wrong approach to take. Someone like myself would be, and don't get me wrong, I like Steve King. I just posted an article on my website recently very favorably toward him. But the thing with me would be just an unabashed, upfront, in-your-face, not acceptance of the label racist, but forcing the enemy to define their terminology, forcing them to put a definition on racism so that I can answer either in the affirmative or negative whether or not I am what they are accusing me of. And, of course, we know the semantic game that they play by calling somebody a white supremacist or a racist. Now, I have answers for all of this. I'm working on a manuscript, which I hope to get published by this summer, entitled White Exceptionalism. I'm a white exceptionalist. I don't believe I am what they consider to be a racist, which, of course, their definition of racist, if you can ever get them to render it, is someone who just arbitrarily and summarily dislikes or even hates people because of their ethnicity, because of their skin color. And obviously, very few people that I associate with would meet that description, and I certainly don't. The only people that I say that I hate with a biblical hatred are the outright, avowed, cutthroat enemies of my Savior, Jesus Christ. And like the psalmist David said, I hate them with a perfect hatred. Like the scripture says, be angry and sin not. But at any rate, I'm not a racist by the definition of this modern era. And of course, I have never been able to get any of them to even give me a definition. The closest I came was in an interview with Alan Colmes, where I challenged him to give me a definition of racism, and he wound up just completely, stepping in the trap, because the definition that he tried to give was so easily picked apart and dissected that it set the tone for the remainder of the interview and put him off balance. So we have to think on our feet. Steve King, unfortunately, is beholden to a financial and monetary support base for his reelection, and he can only go so far into the truth. And he has gotten to the point where I believe probably in the next election, I doubt that he will be able to prevail, because he almost lost this last election, and that was before this most recent debacle where he has been stripped of his committee assignments. But if I went to Congress, it would be something that would make, for instance, on the left, the arrival of the freshman New York Congresswoman, the young lady that is an avowed socialist, it would make her arrival on the scene pale by comparison. If Rick Tyler arrived in Washington, D.C., it would be a three-ring circus like the world has never seen. And I would, believe you me, not only know how to, but I would be willing to maximize that situation and basically turn the town upside down. And that's what we would do. Now, again, it's all a hypothetical, and it's predicated on, the potentiality or possibility of extraordinarily miraculous circumstances transpiring. But with God, all things are possible. It could happen.
So the political construct of Tennessee, there are some states where it's very predominant. For example, in Illinois, Chicago votes and the entire rest of the state votes, and the entire rest of the state is irrelevant because Chicago's vote is the election. In New York State, New York City practically has that distinction as well. California, obviously, most, I would say, rural Californians who don't live in the major cities, at least, are pretty much like the people in the rest of the country. But San Francisco and Los Angeles turn all of their elections. Even in Georgia, though it's not to the extreme that it is in other places, but Atlanta, to a large degree, determines the outcome of elections in Georgia. And of course, we all know what a mess Atlanta is. I mean, is Tennessee like that? Do you have, say, Memphis or Nashville or a combination of a couple of cities where I'll just say the ghetto population and the concentration of liberals into these cities are a voting bloc that is hard for the rest of the state to overcome, or is the vote more evenly distributed in Tennessee? I mean, what is the political battlefield, if you will, that you have to navigate? What is the political roadmap that you have to navigate to get elected in Tennessee?
Tennessee is far more favorable in that regard than California, New York State, Illinois. Certainly, far more favorable than Georgia even, because we don't have a city the stature of Atlanta. Now, Memphis, which some people tongue-in-cheek call Memphrica, Memphis is very Shelby County. It's very, very, very black. Of course, it's on the state line. So between Memphis, Nashville, and Knoxville and Chattanooga, let's say, there are 4 cities that collectively do constitute a voting percentage that is formidable, but it's not to the extent like New York City is to New York State or Atlanta is to Georgia. I mean, Stacey Abrams, horrifyingly, almost became the governor of Georgia. And with a little bit more skill and adept maneuvering with voter fraud, she is already planning on running again statewide.
Well, the Democrats are done with Stacey Abrams. You realize that tomorrow she's going to give the televised Democratic response to the State of the Union.
They are doing with her, obviously, what they did with Obama leading up to introducing him, as a national candidate. I think, obviously, they want to get her elected statewide in Georgia first. That seems to be on their agenda. But at any rate, in Tennessee, we do have a far more plausible roadmap to victory at this stage of the game. Now, of course, it's changing fast, and Tennessee is like every other state right now. It's under attack. It's in the crosshairs in terms of trying to bring in the large numbers of the immigrant population, and it's being done surreptitiously in many ways. The Muslim population is a problem in Tennessee, even though it's not numerically such a big problem, but there are actually 3 enclaves in Tennessee where the Muslims, their presence it's actually blacked out by Google Earth. Shelbyville, Tennessee, Dover, Tennessee, Paris, Tennessee. There are Muslim enclaves where good investigators are convinced that there are jihadi type training centers going on. You can't go investigate them. You will be stopped by the Department of Homeland Security and agents of the federal government, and you will be quizzed and asked what you are doing. Google Earth has it blacked out. So Shelbyville in particular is really bad. It's gotten to the point where the Muslims are taking over a lot of the shopping malls and pushing white people out of the way and being the way they are when they take over. It's not a Dearborn, Michigan yet, but it's headed that way. So we have an interesting mix of things going on in Tennessee, but percentage-wise, Tennessee is, among southern states, it has the largest white population percentage still to this day, and certain districts like mine, overwhelmingly white.
So do you think that the United States government is outright running jihadist terrorist training camps in Tennessee? And that's why the Homeland Security are basically protecting them?
I'm convinced that they are. Several years ago, InfoWars sent reporters up to Islamburg in New York State, and they tried to, encroach upon that enclave there and went to the gate. And very quickly, their reporters were getting calls on their cell phones from the FBI asking what they were doing there. They hadn't given their cell phone numbers to the FBI, and it was made clear to them in no uncertain terms that they were persona non grata there, not by the Islamists, but by the federal government. They had announced prior to this incident that they were going to go to 30 some odd of these, what they believed to be jihadi training centers throughout the country, and they were going to send their reporters there to each and every one and document it. And all of a sudden, that project was shut down, lock, stock, and barrel, and you never heard another peep from it. And the lead reporter that was undertaking this investigation, he wound up no longer being a reporter for InfoWars, a guy by the name of Joe Biggs. So, I believe, we don't have a smoking gun. We can't prove this. But I believe the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. And just like we know that the Mueller investigation and the presence of these treasonous operatives that are now called the Deep State, I've always known about them before they were called the Deep State. Those of us who are students of conspiratorial phenomena, we've known about them for decades. But they definitely are running the show. Obviously, Donald Trump isn't running the show, because if he were, he would appoint a special investigator to investigate Mueller and his decades-long track record of just pervasive criminality, that he has engaged in. The man is an arch criminal of the highest order, and yet he is running, for all intents and purposes, he is the front man that's running the country right now. Donald Trump, appears to be a mere figurehead.
Is Donald Trump really the president, or is he just the guy that they let live in the White House? I've asked that question, about why the president isn't being more assertive. For example, I don't know if you were able to read it or not. I put it at the Barnes Review website, Council of Conservative Citizens, which is affiliated with the American Freedom Party. Earl Holt, the editor of their website, had asked to put it on their website, so you may have read it there. Had written an article on Article 2, Section 3. And the Constitution says that the president convenes both houses of Congress and gives the State of the Union. Or that he could convene both houses of Congress in any circumstance that he considers extraordinary. And so my question was, why is he letting Nancy Pelosi tell him no? She doesn't schedule the State of the Union, he does. It's the same thing that's happening, though, in other venues as well, and that was my article previous to that one, was that every time the president does something, the Marxists automatically find a liberal judge, usually in the Ninth Circuit. They tell him he can't do it, and that's the end of it. President Obama was at 60-some times told these federal judges to go choke themselves. George W. Bush told these federal judges to go choke themselves. Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, John F. Kennedy, pick your president before Trump. Sure, they did things that the courts didn't like. Sure, judges issued restraining orders, and they did it anyways. Why doesn't Trump do it anyways? That's my big question.
Well, we know there is a double standard. Obviously, Trump, in that he has gotten closer to hardcore truth than any of his predecessors. He's immediately subjected to a double standard. But I believe what we're obviously seeing here is just the bare bones reality. One of the telling signs early on was when Trump let one of his closest confidants, long-term individuals that he had, basically this guy was his security man, his security chief, for lack of a better term. That wasn't his official title. But Trump let him go. And I believe that the only way that Trump could have really been president would have been to have had his own hand-picked Secret Service, if you will, his own cadre, inner circle of bodyguards and individuals who would set up a perimeter of protection around him, because otherwise he has to know. The man is very highly intelligent. He's very adept in the ways of the world, and he has to know that his life could very easily be taken. He is basically a captive president. And yes, it is so clear, it is so obvious that in the case like what you cited there, the clear-cut, unambiguous constitutional provision relative to his ability to convene the Congress and the Senate, it was just a remarkable demonstration of his impotency to have to bow to and yield to Pelosi stepping forward.
Extra, read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net.
Extra, read all about it.
The Citizens Informer is a fantastic publication that's published with regularity by the Council of Conservative Citizens. We have only forged the alliance that we now have, the American Freedom Party and the Council of Conservative Citizens, within the last year. And we co-sponsored an event at the Montgomery Bell State Park last June, a conference, and we have another one June 28th through 30th upcoming. And we're going to have an extraordinarily powerful lineup of speakers, and we're going to put on an event that's going to drive the enemy up the wall. And, of course, ramping up to that, we're going to have just, a tremendous amount of publicity. And meeting at the state park, Antifa can't get anywhere near us. The radical revolutionary leftist protesters are completely held at bay by the law enforcement of the state park, and it's a beautiful, scenic, just a fantastic facility. So that's June 28th through the 30th. Earl Holt will be speaking at that, the president of the Council of Conservative Citizens, along with David Duke, Richard Spencer, Dr. Michael Hill of the League of the South, Tom Sunick, former Professor Kevin McDonald. So we've got just an all-star lineup. Simon Roche of South Africa, who's a leading voice for the white minority in South Africa. So we've got this great event. And you see, if we don't hammer away what you just so articulately spoke of, what the president's real power is, and what has been reprinted on the Council of Conservative Citizens website, thanks to your authorship and promulgating these great pieces of journalism. If we don't get this information out, nobody will. And yet we have to do it in a far greater, more amplified extent and degree than we have heretofore. We've got to exponentially multiply our platform. And in order to do that, we're going to have to be out there on the absolute cutting edge of controversy, and we're going to have the protection of Almighty God, because once we are effective, the enemy will move with rapid dispatch to utterly and totally destroy us. And the only thing that can save us in that situation would be the sovereign hand of God. If Donald Trump, for instance, were to really be president, they would move to kill him instantaneously. And he could only be saved and preserved by the protective and sovereign hand of God. And a man has to be willing to lay it all on the line, a la what many of our founding fathers did, in the 1776 era, and really, lay his life on the line and trust, exclusively in the power of Almighty God for his survival, like the story of the bulletproof George Washington, how he survived, in this onslaught during the French and Indian War, when, in the aftermath, he realized that he should have been dead, scores of times over.
The North Carolina Heritage Political Action Committee was organized by concerned citizens of North Carolina in 2015 in response to the increased attacks on North Carolina's history and heritage. The North Carolina Heritage PAC supports state and local candidates for public office who pledge and show their support for the protection of Confederate memorials and the preservation of all of North Carolina's history. We all know that Confederate memorials and symbols are the easy targets, and that the end game of our leftist enemies is to erase and rewrite all of history, from the colonies to the War on Terror. If we fight them for our state's rich Confederate history and heritage, we may be able to stop them from their mission of total destruction. Join the North Carolina Heritage PAC now by visiting ncheritagepac.org. Once again, that is www.ncheritagepac.org. And help us on the front lines of North Carolina politics. The mission statement of North Carolina Heritage PAC is that the North Carolina Heritage PAC was created with the purpose of supporting diverse efforts to defend and preserve the heritage, traditions, monuments, cemeteries, flags, emblems, and other legacies of North Carolina history against those efforts to remove, deface, legislate against, alter, and otherwise corrupt or pervert their meaning, history, presentation, and standing in our state. Once again, www.ncheritagepac.org. One other thing I was hoping to chat with you about. Were you familiar with a party called the South Carolina Secessionist Party?
Not by any direct affiliation, but I am familiar with it by name.
Okay. Well, the leader of the South Carolina Secessionist Party has basically thrown in the towel, and we'll be reporting that in this Friday's Dixie Heritage newsletter. But James Bessinger, the chairman, the president of the South Carolina Secessionist Party, he's basically in the process right now. He's taking down the party's website, Facebook pages, notifying the lawyers in some lawsuits against them that the party's political or legal entity is in the process of dissolving, so they no longer have anybody to sue. Of course, my personal opinion is now they're just going to turn around and sue him personally, and he's going to lose his shirt, but I won't go into depth on that here. But the South Carolina Secessionist Party is going away, and the reason why is because its founder and its president has basically abandoned the cause. He no longer wants to be an advocate. He's decided that all of us Confederates are all just a bunch of homophobic racists. Of course, he himself is a sodomite, and he's also a pagan, neo-pagan, whatever that is. That's how he describes himself. But he said that all of the Confederate people are basically homophobic, racist, Christians who hate homosexuals and who hate pagans and who hate anything that's not white and Christian. And so he no longer wants to be a part of the movement anymore. Honestly, I don't know that paganism or sodomy are compatible with the morals and the culture and the character of our ancestors, and so he probably does need to move along. I was kind of kicking around the idea of possibly starting a Southern political party. And not so much that I was thinking that this political party was going to be actively getting candidates elected, at least not at the national level. I mean, perhaps at the local level in some places it might be able to do so. I guess maybe you could call it a platform party, call it an ideological party, bush-shaking party. I don't know. Just something to go out there and rattle the bushes a little bit, be a voice, if you will, be a John the Baptist party, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. And now I've been approached by some people in South Carolina who apparently are in a position to take this vacuum or whatever you want to call it that's being created by the South Carolina Secessionist Party going away. And it looks like the Palmetto Freedom Party, which is a name that's kind of in the works right now, might be emerging kind of as the phoenix out of that. What would the possibility be of the American Freedom Party partnering with a pro-Southern political party, or I don't know if partnering with would be the term, or I don't know if you could have one political party that is a branch of another political party, or maybe you just have some advice on the viability of what we're trying to do. I mean, I guess I'm asking you a very broad question here.
Well, I think that we would definitely want to affiliate. Or any other, strategy or method that might be deemed, most viable and appropriate by your fellow associates there in the Palmetto State in South Carolina. But clearly, obviously, it would be in both of our best interests to do what you're talking about doing and have a strong working relationship or affiliation, if not, outright, formal connection. And there are different angles and avenues that could be pursued along such lines. But I would strongly advise that you do something to fill that vacuum, because having the operational configuration or structure of an established and organized party, even if it's only a handful of people at its outset, it's kind of like, not having a 501c3 government-approved church, but having an ecclesiastical assembly. It is something that gives us strength. It gives us a power and a resiliency that we don't otherwise have as we stand alone as individuals. And the ability to organize along political lines is a very sacred, very vital, pivotal, foundational right that we have. And if you don't exercise rights like muscles, they atrophy and we lose them. So it's a blessing that isn't even in disguise, if you ask me, that this character who's a sodomite and a pagan is bowing out. My hat's off to him for whatever good he has done. But you're 100% correct. Sodomy and paganism are not ultimately compatible with a winning formula and a winning strategy, and with the genuine historicity of our people and what has made us great throughout the generations and throughout the centuries. So it is better that he go the way of the dinosaur, so to speak, and and ride off into the sunset, so that people who are more able and qualified to carry this mantle forward, such as yourself and those maybe closely associated with you, can undertake that mission. And again, I'm excited because South Carolina, obviously is one of the key critical states. I used to live in Rock Hill, South Carolina myself many years ago, and loved the state and did some traveling around, and love the coast and just love the state of South Carolina. So I hope that y'all decide to put this idea into action, and we'll do anything and everything we can to interface, affiliate with, do whatever we can to work together. And hopefully there's a point man that can step forward and take the baton and build on what this gentleman did. These publicity type actions are very, very important. They're very valuable, but of course, in and of themselves, they don't really ultimately do us any good if we don't lay out an infrastructure. Secession is the only answer, but realistically, getting a whole state to secede is a very tough nut to crack. We're going to have to start on a smaller geographic type basis than that, and we're going to have our own version of Orania, in South Africa. But unlike Orania, which is limited in terms of its ability to grow and expand, we will have to have a model that will, let's say, for instance, hypothetically, if we take a county, if we by numbers and by the electoral process, if we take over a county, we will have to have the ability to then allow what we're doing to spread to the adjacent counties, and it could very quickly have the prairie fire effect. That's the only way that we're going to successfully embark upon a secessionist agenda or blueprint for action. But without that, again, we really don't have any hope, because the enemy has seen to it that all of the areas of strength for the white race are being systematically eroded to the point where very soon there will be no hope of a homeland for our people. And of course, it's all by design. Even in my county, which is close to 100% white, through the federal funding of low-income housing, they are preparing to mandate the influx of non-whites in order for the funding to be received. And that's the way they always work. They use the Judas Iscariot, the 30 pieces of silver, and they buy off the traitors within our own racial family. And that's where we have to have the apparatus intact, the watchdog apparatus, and the ability to put the fear of God into our wayward kinsmen who are so readily selling our birthright and being the Trojan horse, surrendering to our ideological adversaries and those who are more than our ideological adversaries, who have made it plain in no uncertain terms that they want to commit genocide against us. So it's getting down to where the rubber meets the road. It's getting down to the nitty-gritty. And we're going to have to take action in an expedited fashion if we are going to have any meaningful hope of staving off what is otherwise going to be a very perilous, inevitable consequence that we are facing.
Well, your website, Rick Tyler for Congress, is that the one you want to put out there, or do you have another website that you want to call all of our attention to?
Well, the Rick Tyler for Congress, certainly the American Freedom Party website. American Third Position was the original name of the American Freedom Party, so the website is listed under that as well as American Freedom Party. The Council of Conservative Citizens website, all of these websites will give the reader, the person that checks them out, a ton of information, a tremendous, for those who are neophytes and novices and greenhorns, it'll bring people up to speed very, very quickly. Even for the seasoned veterans, the guys who have been around the block infinite times, there's always cutting-edge information. I learn new things every day from, our own websites that other people are contributing. So it's a group effort. It's a team effort. The synergistic principle, the sum of the parts are greater than the whole. And we're having a leadership summit in March at the Montgomery Bell in near Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm going to be laying out to a select group of leadership individuals what I'm calling is a 7-point plan for victory. And I myself have been involved in activism for 40 years. In 2019, I'm marking my 40th anniversary in activism. I started when I was 21 years old. I've learned a lot, and of course we have a tremendous brain trust in the leadership of the American Freedom Party and the Council of Conservative Citizens and those who are in alliance with us. And we welcome others who want to get involved and work with us. But again, it's going to be the weekend of March the 8th, 9th, and 10th at the Montgomery Bell in Nashville, a leadership summit. And coming out of that, we're going to have a multi-pronged, multifaceted agenda that we're going to roll out. Many very, very commendable efforts in the past. Hopefully we can learn from the mistakes of many of our predecessors. I myself have been involved in efforts that have fizzled towards establishing Christian covenant communities and things of this nature. And hopefully we can put the pieces of the puzzle together sufficiently now because the time is definitely ticking down. And we have to make haste. The king's business requires haste, as the scripture says, and we want to do everything we can as quickly as we can.
Well, I appreciate you being our guest today, Rick.
God bless you, Ed. It's been a real privilege, and look forward to talking to you again soon, hopefully.
All right. Yes, sir. All right. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
And that was our interview with Rick Tyler, the Chief Executive Officer of the American Freedom Party. Was glad to be able to get Rick on the record there toward the end of the interview to state that he would support and be able to assist in the formation of a Southern political party. And that is definitely something that we want to look at the possibility of doing in the days, the weeks, and the months ahead. Hopefully have it in place prior to the 2020 election cycle really kicking into full gear. Would like to encourage you to go to his website, Rick Tyler for Congress. I think that when you get there, I think you're going to find there's a lot of interesting stuff there, and you'll really get to know Rick a little bit better by visiting his website. I'd also like to encourage you to go to the TBR website, TBR, of course, being the TBR and TBR Radio Presents. And that is barnesreview.org. And go to the TBR website and click the blog link there, and you'll find the link to the article that I had referenced there where I had written. It's titled Article 2, Section 3, talking, of course, about the president's authority in the matter of the State of the Union, and basically how he can rein in this Marxist Democrat-controlled House of Representatives if he wants to. The constitutional authority is there for him to do it, and he can take the reins right from Nancy Pelosi. It's just a question of whether or not he's going to exercise that prerogative or not. But I believe you'll enjoy reading that article, and I would like to call your attention to it. I'd also like to call your attention to my website, www.dixieheritage.net. When you go to dixieheritage.net, you'll be able to sign up for our free weekly Dixie Heritage email newsletter. And every week we'll send you the news and information of everything that's going on across the Southland. And no cost, no obligation. All you have to do is give us your email address. And when you do, we'll also sign you up to receive a free copy of my book, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. And I know that that is going to be a great resource for you as well. Just to kind of let you know what's going on here in the days and weeks coming up, we have an interview scheduled with H.K. Edgerton, and hopefully we'll be able to get that recorded here in the next few days. And within the next few weeks to a month or so, we'll be able to get that broadcast out. But know that it's forthcoming, hopefully, Lord willing. We also have another interview scheduled with Dissident Mama. I'll be recording that later this week. And then, of course, some point down the road, we will take that recording and we'll broadcast it as well. Have some other interviews that we've already recorded that we look forward to processing for you. One of them in particular is a second interview with Dr. Scott Lively. Last time, of course, we talked about his run for governor of Massachusetts. In this upcoming interview, we're going to talk entirely about his book, The Pink Swastika. And that was definitely an interesting read, something that you'll want to tune in for. So anyways, however you're listening to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, come back, same time, same place next week. We'll be back. Until then, God bless.